Hey, Al, I'm Bria Robinson, and this is Shout, Outdoor Lifestyle Magazine. For many people, getting outdoors is a great way to find release, have fun, be adventurous, and hopefully get more connected with who you're truly meant to be. But not everyone will get to realize how through Christ, getting outdoors can help you to lead with resilience, grow with adversity, and win together. My guests today, Blaine Smith and Brandon Young, have a passion to share their hard-earned wisdom and help people hear the distinct voice of God in their lives. Their book, Perseverance is Greater Than Endurance, can help you forge stronger teams, execute bold strategies, and win regardless of the challenges. Welcome, Blaine and Brandon. It's good to have y'all. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having us.
Yep. Thank you.
My pleasure. All right, so I am currently serving in the U.S. Army. I'm a Staff Sergeant, E6. Both of y'all have served, so thank you very much for both of your service. I really appreciate that. Can you share more about yourself and how that led to your business, the Applied Leadership Partners?
Sure. Yeah, I'll kick us off and then hand it over to Blaine. First and foremost, Bria, thanks for serving. Thank you for your service. Absolutely love it. I think back to my times as a staff sergeant in the Army, and you are in the golden years, my friend. You will know that as you as you continue to progress in service. So just by way of hitting some of the wave tops, I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I joined the U.S. Army straight out of high school. I ended up staying in the 75th Ranger Regiment for just shy of a decade. So I went from private to sergeant first class in the Rangers. I conducted multiple rotations to Afghanistan. I was in the Middle East 8 days after the towers fell on 9/11, and I did all that, and then got out after four total rotations to Afghanistan, really so that I could figure out if I could be a husband and a father. Got into the commercial side of healthcare, did that for a number of years, and then Blaine and I both worked together at a veteran serving nonprofit. And then Blaine and I actually launched our company, Applied Leadership Partners, in March of 2020. Can't make this stuff up. We launched it, I think, on the 17th, and I believe everything shut down maybe 3 days later. So that was super interesting. And we persevered through all of that, and the reason we started Applied Leadership Partners is because we really wanted to share some of that hard-earned leadership wisdom from leading in the military and military special operations, then also in the corporate sector and the social impact sector.
Brandon and I have had, very similar kind of parallel paths. So I graduated from high school and I went off to West Point when I was 18, spent 4 years there. I graduated in June of 2001, thinking my military service was going to look like one thing. And then a few months later, 9/11 happens, and it really bent the trajectory of my service and my entire life, just through that one single event. And Bray, you may not be old enough to really remember what it felt like on that day, but it was quite a shock to all of us. And I think we all knew in the moment that things were going to be very different for us. So I went off to Fort Hood, Texas, was a cavalry officer for a few years, did a tour in Iraq, went to the Special Forces qualification course for a couple of years after that, and ended up at 3rd Special Forces Group at Fort Bragg. Did a combat tour in Afghanistan as a Special Forces team leader. And much like Brandon, after almost 10 years in the service, was at a point where I had to decide, do I want to do this for the next 10, 12, 15 years, or do I want to see if I can be a little closer to my family and turn the page? And I decided to get out in 2010. And that's where I met Brandon. I think if I could just say, like, our work at Applied Leadership Partners in many ways is the culmination of all of these seemingly random experiences we've had throughout our leadership journey, that when you look back, you can pull the thread and you can see what did leadership look like for us as young men in very high stakes environments? What did it look like for us as early career professionals trying to figure out corporate America? What did it look like for us as we entered the social impact space and had to build a business from scratch? And none of those things seem to make a whole lot of sense when said discreetly, but if you're going to be in the leadership development space and help people work through real challenges, it turns out that all of those experiences have really helped to inform our perspective and give us a chance to help guide others along the way.
All right, so I know your book is in the business and leadership category, but it's really more than that. How do you want to help? How do you want to use your book and that platform to help people And in what ways does it reflect your journey with God?
When we came together to write the book, we find this in our work every day. What we find is that nobody has a monopoly on adversity. We all experience difficult things in life. We experience things that really rock us to our core. Some of the things that we really thought about when we put this work forward was to give people a perspective, to help them to see that if they're having a hard time, it doesn't mean that they're crazy. It doesn't mean that they're weak. What it means is that they're human beings. We can find ways to win in many contexts, regardless of what you're leading, regardless of what you're doing out there. Whether this be something that you're leading in business, you're leading a ministry, you're leading in church, you're leading your family, you're leading a kid's soccer team, whatever. There's plenty of adversity to go around, and we could talk a little bit about how perseverance is uniquely different from just enduring a difficult situation. Like when you think about enduring, it's a lot like just kind of holding on. It's a lot about like surviving. But when you think about it, persevering, it's more into thriving. It's more into transforming. And I look at my life and so many of the seasons of my life and these episodes of adversity, as opposed to just holding on and staying stuck in the suffering. It was really an opportunity to persevere, to move on and suffer for significance. And it really led me down a life where my life was completely transformed by Christ. When I think about this idea of persevering and transforming, and as we go through life, what that helped me do is get closer to God, closer to Christ, the Holy Spirit, God's people, and closer to my true self as opposed to the false self.
I would say for me, there are really a couple things that come out that are maybe distinctly different from Brandon's experience. So I grew up in a house, I grew up down in Southwest Florida, but amongst a couple of very Midwestern parents that were very kind of hardworking, earnest people. And you might describe it as sort of a non-practicing or occasionally practicing Christian household. So it was always something that was near us, but was never fully committed to. But what I did learn from my parents and from my upbringing, and certainly through my time at West Point in the Army, was this idea of servant leadership, um, and building a life around things like integrity and care for others, and reminding yourself always that this is not about you, and it's important to be part of something bigger than yourself, and that's something I've carried with me my entire life. And as Brandon and I got into our practice, we wanted to teach people how to be, better leaders, perhaps by remembering that we serve others. But as we started to dig into the more kind of esoteric and the more academic aspects of this, for me personally, you start to see these common threads throughout the world, and you start to see kind of what the truth looks like with a capital T. And if you, like me, have studied lots of different spiritual, religious, philosophical traditions, I think you start to realize, at least I started to realize, that kind of all truth is God's truth. This idea of servant leadership and this idea that there are things that are just true in this world. And if you look across your experience and you look across, the literature and the text, you realize that there are some things that are worth sharing, and they're worth sharing consistently and very clearly, because those are going to be the things that people can latch on to have a better life. Um, and so I think that's kind of what we're really trying to do with the book, is open up that new window into some old truth.
We all have that thing that we hold on to that we want to, we want to take control of, we want to control, but we have to give to him. And no matter, what your career is, for me, it's been a little hard kind of sharing my faith and living my faith out in the military. But I believe that no matter what you do, if you are a believer, if you are saved, there's certain things that's going to stand out about you.
One of the big things that really was a part of my journey is that I just had so many Ranger buddies who were people who loved Jesus and they loved me. And that spoke so loud, that shouted louder than anything else could have shouted. So I think that's all we're called to do, right? Love God, love others.
You help people explore perseverance through 5 key factors. That's change, uncertainty, acceptance, choice, and growth. And I know, like you guys know, in the military and in life, we face all these. I'd like for you to help us look at each of these more closely and see how being outdoors can help us understand and build upon them. And most importantly, how God uses each of these to shape us and our character in Him.
Brie, I'll give you an anecdote that may cover more than one of these, so please forgive me. But I thought a lot about this morning in preparation for our conversation, and I will tell you that I have always felt the closest to God when I'm in the ocean. I always have felt like the mountains and the ocean, especially for me, are such a wonderful representation or metaphor connection to God. And the reason I love the ocean for this, and I think surfing is a great example for me personally, is because the conditions are always changing. It's never the same 2 days in a row. It'll never be the same as it was yesterday. You have to learn to accept what is there and work with it. And the other thing about the ocean is that as beautiful and majestic and giving as it can be, it can also take away in an instant if you don't respect it and you don't work with it. And so that's something as I look back throughout my life and being someone who grew up in Florida and has spent a lot of time there and a lot of time in the water, um, I've had to learn to really embrace the change that comes with those experiences and to appreciate every day for what it is. If the water's cold or if it's warm, if the waves are big or if they're small, if it's rough or if it's calm, it's still there, and it's still makes me feel close to God. And I've developed over a long period of time a real appreciation for its power and for, my ability to get out there and paddle out on the surfboard and ride a wave is one of the most exhilarating things of all time. But the waves are there when the waves are there, and the waves will beat you to smithereens if you don't respect them, and sometimes even when you do. And I've never found anything that gives me as much peace or as much clarity as being out just beyond a set of waves sitting on my surfboard early in the morning. Um, and and again, sorry to not keep this just on the change piece, but in some ways it sort of cuts through and across the entire thing. And if you want to if you want to be a part of that, you have to be willing to submit a little bit of that control and demonstrate a willingness to work with it, and make a choice to go back out there after you've just gotten wiped out a few times and learn to read the waves a little better, to show them a little bit more respect. That's what always comes to the front of my mind when I think about the change and the uncertainty and the acceptance of interacting with nature and seeing that as God's power.
Yeah. I'll pick up on that. And, you mentioned the framework. And so maybe I'll just kind of hit the wave tops, no pun intended, of each one of those. And we can, talk as deep into them as you wish. But change is really where it starts. And we talk about perseverance. And so when we talk about change, we talk about things come at you fast and often without warning. That's kind of the crux of change. This brings about uncertainty, right? You're uncertain if am I enough for this? Am I trained enough for this? Do I know enough for this? And uncertainty brings about a basic human emotion, and that is fear. We like to use a lot of proxy words for that, like I'm nervous, I'm anxious, all these things, but it's fear that rests at the bottom of that. And fear is the friction that holds us in place. And so we find that purpose or pain will eventually make us move. We will either run toward our purpose or we will run from our pain. And that brings about this idea of acceptance. And we talk a lot about you must accept what you can control. You must, you must let go of what you cannot control, right? This is really key to the entire process, and it's key, frankly, to the faith journey. Are you going to, surrender, and are you going to surrender in the right direction? Because we all know, anyone that's been alive long enough knows that you don't have to. You can just keep trying to hold on and say, no, I got this. I got this all on my own. And that is when choice comes into play. This is where we choose to become our creeds, our values, our ethos, all the things that we say that we are in life. This is where choice becomes so critical, because you can have all the acceptance, you can have the decisions, everything. And there's a difference between looking at the decisions and making choices, actually choosing to pursue that. And we would submit that it happens more than just once. You have to make the choice over and over and over and over again. That is that proverbial walk. This is the sanctification process, if you want to kind of like really get, theological on it. And that brings about growth. And with growth, what we submit is that you will be changed on the other side of perseverance. You will not be the same person who started at the beginning of that journey when that all that change and uncertainty rocked you. You will become more wise. You will become somebody who understands how to truly persevere, how to make those choices, because guess what? You're gonna have to do it again. Just a couple days ago, my dog and I did a 13,000-foot peak in the James. We did James Peak. So hiking through snowfield, started at 10,000 feet. The summit was 13,271 feet of elevation. And Blaine and I use this illustration of being out and navigating out in the wild, in the wilderness, in the woods, in the mountains, all this kind of stuff, because it's so appropriate for life. You have ups, you have downs. You're going to have peaks, you're going to have valleys. You're going to get lost along the way. You're going to find that the trail is not marked. Now, I can look at my All Trails map and see that there is supposed to be a trail here. That's lovely, but it's not super helpful when it's buried under 3 feet of snow. So my journey over the weekend here was, this hike that I did with my dog. I'm sitting there and I can't see the trail. And what inevitably happens, which I'm confident that you have experienced out in land navigation in the military, is like, am I on track? Is this the right track? I'm not so sure. It's supposed to say this, but it doesn't. I'm supposed to have a trail, but it's not marked because it's covered in snow. Brings about that uncertainty. The change comes about. you know, what can I accept? I can accept that I can't see the trail. I can accept that I can start to terrain associate. I can accept that I can, make some choices here, and making those consistent choices one by one in accordance with pulling out my tools, getting my map, getting my compass, seeing with the peak that I'm headed for, and just consistently going and settling in. Eventually, we made it to the summit, and I'm here to tell you it was hysterical. It took us 3 hours to get to the summit, right? So we ascended 3,000 feet, 3 hours over 4 miles. We got down in 1 hour. We were glissading, we were hooping and hollering. I was singing worship music. I was crying out, thanking God because it was just so beautiful. And I'm here to tell you that I was not feeling that as I was on my hike up. But I consistently chose to take one step after another. And it's like, that's the payoff, right? Like that's the growth is we go through these difficult things and 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 you truly do start to see like the character of God, the love of God, the faith of God. You experience that joy as you're out there making these choices and kind of sticking with it as opposed to just opting out and saying like, ah, forget it. I'm just going to go back to the trailhead.
Can you guys kind of talk about how, acceptance almost kind of seems counterintuitive to perseverance? But in fact, with God, counterintuitive is often the exactly what we're supposed to pursue and what we're supposed to have with Him. Can y'all share a little bit more, kind of briefly, on the acceptance piece of that?
I hear Brandon say often that, God doesn't give you what you want, He gives you what you need. And I think that's a big part of acceptance as well, is like taking that longer view of things and saying, this is not what I want right now. I wish things were different than they are right now. But then asking the question, what am I to learn from this? What am I trying to be taught here? Why is this something that maybe I need? And a classic example of this, and this has happened to me 1,000 times, is I'm on a hike to go somewhere. I'm trying to get to a destination, and I get part of the way through the hike, and I realize this path I'm on is not a very good path to where I'm going. Something's been washed out, or it's too thick, the trail falls away, and this is not the best way to get where I'm going. And at this point, there's something you need to accept. You need to accept the fact that you've put in all these miles to get to this point, and you may have to backtrack and find a different route. And the choice here is I'm still trying to get where I ultimately set out to go. And the fact of the matter is, the best route for me to get there is to go back the way I came and take a different route. And yet many of us, including myself, have still said, no, I'm going to keep going on this route. I've invested too much. I've got too much caught up in this. I'll just bushwhack my way toward where I'm trying to go, even though we know by looking at the map and based on what we're seeing in front of our face, that the best thing to do is to go back and go around. And for me, that is the closest metaphor for acceptance with regard to the outdoors. It happens all the time. Do we have the ability to accept things for what they truly are and not what we wish they were? Do we have the ability to understand very clearly what about this situation is firmly within my control and what falls outside of my control? And can I accept that? And the counterintuitive part, and I'm glad you brought this up, and we write about it a lot in the book, is that, especially for like big barrel-chested freedom fighters from the special operations world, we don't like to use a word like surrender, right? And we think that surrendering, or certainly even just accepting something sometimes, means that we condone it, that we're okay with it, or that we're giving up our agency. And we would submit that it's exactly the opposite. When you accept a situation for what it is, when you're willing to surrender the things that are outside of your control, you have total agency because you've just decided that you're going to take full ownership of the things that are within your control and do your very best within that span of influence. And so I think it's a tricky one to talk about for a lot of people, as you pointed out. But I think if you understand it for what it really is, it's a little bit easier to embrace.
I can't unsee the illustration of Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane here. You want to talk about an act of ultimate agency. Clearly, he did not want the cup that God had given to him, but he needed it and we needed it. And so he didn't ask, and you think about like, what did he ask his disciples to do? He didn't ask them to take anything from him. He didn't ask him to make it better for him. He just asked them to stay awake with him, to sit with him, and to be with him in the process of him, accepting what was the path. And he knew it. And so, I mean, like so I love how Blaine, mentioned the fact that, it's like, thinking about surrender. I mean, for God's sakes, the Ranger Creed says surrender is not a Ranger word, right? And yet still, living a life where I look at the example of Jesus, surrender is what changed my life. Surrendering my life to Jesus transformed my life. It is the ultimate act of agency.
Tell us again how people can learn more about your Applied Leadership Partnership and how they can get your book, The Perseverance is Greater Than Endurance.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and thank you for having us, by the way. This has been awesome, and we certainly do appreciate it. The best place to find us is probably at appliedleadershippartners.com. All of our work is there. You can grab our podcast there. You can grab our book there if you want, and talk to us about anything that's on your mind, especially around leadership. You can grab Perseverance is Greater Than Endurance anywhere books are sold. You can grab it on Amazon or Barnes and Noble or Bookshop or wherever you'd prefer to buy your books. We would certainly appreciate it.
What's the best way for someone to kind of start to apply what they've learned, what you guys have talked about today, and what they've read in your book? And what can they expect as some of the outcomes when they start to apply that to their life?
You have to practice. That's what I would say, is take the stuff and put it into practice. Don't wait for the perfect time. Don't wait to have a certain position of leadership. Don't wait until you feel more confident. Just start to practice, in ways big and small. It might be a conversation you need to have with somebody who's a peer. It might be inside your own home with your kids. But start to put it into practice and get the reps. It is very, very hard to be good at almost anything, certainly leadership, if you don't get some reps and you don't practice and you're too afraid to do it a little bit wrong the first time. So that's my very quick advice is give it a shot, get some reps, put it into play.
Yeah, we often share, get out on the trail. There are no answers at the trailhead.
Good advice. All right. Well, again, I've been speaking with Blaine Smith and Brandon Young. authors of Perseverance is Greater Than Endurance. Be sure to read more from them in Shout Outdoor Lifestyle magazine and check out their book. Blaine and Brandon, again, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure and honor meeting you guys.
So good seeing you.
Anytime.